Lamar is a wonky evaluation because he was 14th in expected points added, which you see that and you think, man, he was really average last year. But seemingly being average is actually really good when you factor in that that stat doesn't contextualize for the supporting cast at all. And the supporting cast for Lamar was really rough aside from the offensive line because the receiving unit was a bottom 5 to at a minimum bottom 10 unit in all of the league. So being statistically average with such poor weapons is actually a testament to just how good Lamar truly is. Going back to the offensive line, though, that was something that really helped Lamar because they were ranked second best in pass blocking and second best in run blocking as well per PFF grades. So they really had that on lock. And really, it should be a similar performance for them this upcoming year because the only really big addition or subtraction they made was losing Ben Powers, who was a solid pass protector, and replacing him with John Simpson, who is admittedly a bit of an issue in the last time he played, which was 2021. That was the last time he played significant snaps. So there is reason to think there'll be some sort of regression, but it shouldn't be too bad. The rest of the offensive line is still exceptional, with Ronnie Stanley and Morgan Moses being an elite tackle duo, Tyler Linderbaum being a top 5 center in the league, and Kevin Zeitler being one of the 10 best guards in football. They still have really solid starting players, and in addition to that, they have good depth as well, which you never want to see any injuries, but if there were any injuries to the offensive line for the Ravens, they should be able to stay afloat because Patrick McCarry is a really talented backup tackle. Sam Mustafar, maybe the best player in the NFL that can't block in pass protection at all. He is a really solid run blocker, though, as a backup, so he's going to fulfill half of the requirements of being a backup. And at the end of the day, a backup that can't pass protect is not too foreign of a concept. I would say that's most backups. So they have the offensive line really nicely set for this upcoming year. For weapons, there's a lot more optimism this year than there was last year because they still have good old Mark Andrews, who is an elite tight end, and he remains their number one option. He's probably the third best tight end in football. He was third in yards per game at the tight end position and 10th in yards per reception. So he can go deep downfield and be efficient that way, but he can also kill you with continual short gains that just really demoralize you as a defense. In addition to that, I think their number one wide receiver is going to be Zay Flowers. He has the potential to be the number 2 for the Ravens day one. He was my 28th best player in this year's draft, and they took him 22nd overall, so it was solid value. It wasn't really like they reached on a position of need. They got about where you would expect to see him go. Odell, I'm not as high on as some people are because he isn't close to what he once was, but he can still be a solid number 3, and he represents a clear upgrade over recent Ravens wide receivers. So he's a pretty good benchmark for just how improved the unit is. In years past, he would have been probably the number 1 wide receiving option for the Ravens. Now he's going to be maybe the 3rd option for them. That's really solid. In addition to, they have some depth. They have Devin Duvernay, who's an all-right gadget player, and they also have Nelson Aguilar, who's solid depth as well. At tight end, they have a really good number 2 in Isaiah Likely, who's one of the best tight end number 2s in the entire league, which is really impressive. They just lost their backup tight end last year, and they replaced him with a equally good option. So that tells you how good and talented this Ravens roster truly is. At running back, J.K. Dobbins is a good running back when he's healthy. The issue is he hasn't been healthy. He's only played in about a year and a half since being drafted in 2020. So he really has missed a significant portion of games. That's a 3-year sample size. He's played about half of the time in, and he's looked good when he's played. It's just going to be a question of if he's going to be healthy or not. the positivity doesn't stop there, too, because moving to the defensive side of things, their defensive backs are really, really solid. Marlon Humphrey is an elite cornerback one. He's one of the best in the business. He can shut you down in man coverage. He's also pretty solid in zone as well. Rock Yassin is a solid number 2. He's a pretty clear drop-off from Humphrey, but he's not going to be somebody that offenses are really going to want to attack because he is more than competent as a player. They have a bit of a question mark at nickel. If Ronald Darby can move to nickel from primarily being an outside guy, they're going to be set there, and they're going to have an elite corner room. If not, and they end up going with Brandon Stevens or Arthur Mollett, there's going to be an issue at nickel. And that's really an area you don't want to have be problematic because so many talented players play in the third wide receiver role, the slot as they call it. And that's where the nickel is going to be at their most valuable. Humphrey is good enough to shadow the great players of the NFL in the nickel, but if he plays the nickel, then there's going to be a question mark on the outside, unless Darby is just going to be playing the outside full time and Humphrey is going to be moved into the nickel in those specific matchups, in which case there's not too much of an issue. But I think Humphrey is at his best as an outside corner, so it would really be nice if Darby could just transition to nickel, because then you keep your best players situated at positions you know they're good at, and there's just not too much of an overhauling of the defense as a whole, because really last year they were pretty solid defensively. And that was the first year with a new defensive coordinator, so you expect it to improve even a step up from what it was last year if the cohesion can be there. So it'll be really interesting to see what the defense ends up looking like this upcoming year. Again, it will be an issue if Stevens or Mollett is going to be getting real playing time, but if they're not, this secondary is going to be one of the best in the league, because at safety, Kyle Hamilton was PFF's top-graded safety in his rookie year, which sounds like I'm misspeaking, but I promise you I'm not. He was the best in the entire league as a rookie. He is the safety equivalent of Sauce Gardner, almost. He's maybe not quite as good as Sauce is at corner, but to be the best in the league year one, very rare, especially for secondary players. They usually take a little bit to get going, and it doesn't stop with Hamilton. Marcus Williams is also elite. So you have two great safeties right there, and then they have some nice depth at the third safety as well, which is super important. A lot of third safety sets are going to be used in the modern era, and Geno Stone is solid depth there. They also have all right depth at corner as well. Trayvon Mullen is a competent corner as well, which means they have a lot of guys you're not going to just be picking on as an offense, which is exactly how you want to build your defense. You want to have as least of targetable guys as possible, and the Ravens really have that. Shifting to the front seven, specifically their defensive line to get started, Michael Pierce is a great nose tackle when healthy, but he kind of has the same issue that J.K. Dobbins has, in that he hasn't been healthy. So it remains to be seen if he's going to be able to play through the entire season. He's really struggled to do that in recent years, but if he is able to, they have no issues at all at the nose tackle position. He is a great space eater, and he can pressure the quarterback a little bit, especially for a man of his size. He's about 350 pounds, I believe. So he's huge. He's great. It's just going to be a question of if he stays on the field for the whole year or not. The defensive tackles around him are also very competent, though, which is nice. It helps take a little bit of the pressure off of him. They have Broderick Washington, who is a very solid, balanced defensive tackle. He can do a little bit of everything. And then Justin Matabrike is also really good. You could have an argument for days, if you wanted to, on which of these players is better. They're both really similar in that they're both good in the run defense, and they can both pressure the quarterback a little bit. They're not going to be world beaters by any stretch. They're not going to get, you an obscene amount of pressures, but for being double teamed on every play, they're going to generate some push for the pocket, and that's really all you need to see for defensive tackles in their scheme. So very nice interior. And then the edge group has a ton of potential. You have Jadeveon Clowney, who is an elite run defender, and he can pressure the quarterback a bit. He's not great at sacking the quarterback, but he can get after the quarterback and make their life difficult by forcing them to make pressured throws, which is a super valuable aspect of the game. Obviously, it'd be nice if he could finish the play with a sack, but he's still adding value just by getting after the quarterback in the first place. After Clowney, you have Tyus Bowser and Odafe Owe. Both were disappointing this past year, but they've shown an ability to get after the quarterback in years past. So I'm guessing at least one of them will be an above average starter for them this upcoming year. And then the person that is really essential to just how good this edge room is going to be is David Ojabo. He would have been a first rounder if he wasn't injured at the time of last year's draft. So he is super talented. He is an athletic freak, which is exactly what you want to see at the edge position, perhaps the position that matters most, what your athleticism is. And he really is going to be good depth at a very, very minimum. He was falling in the draft because he was injured before the draft even started, which sucks. He's going to be healthy for this year, though, so we can really get to see what he actually is. And in additional depth news, they have Travis Jones on the inside, who's also really solid. He is another huge body that's not going to get pushed around in the run game, so they have a ton of talent, and they also have a ton of depth. Shifting to linebacker, I'm just going to warn you, you might not like the ranking of Roquan Smith, but I'm just the messenger for this. I don't really know a great way to holistically evaluate linebackers because tackles are very misleading. You can rack up tackles by allowing completions and then tackling the carrier or the receiver afterwards versus that's going to count the same as if you tackle a ball carrier right at the line of scrimmage. So tackles are not a good way to measure linebackers, and PFF grades, I think, are generally pretty darn good, but there's definitely a disconnect between PFF's analysis and what the general public thinks of Roquan Smith, because Roquan ranked 26th out of all linebackers in PFF grade last year. So very solid. That's out of 81 linebackers. But I think most people would probably have him in their top 10. So there's a bit of a disconnect between his grade and what most people think of him. I think in the end, it's probably somewhere in between. He looked great in the games I saw him play in, but I don't know exactly where I'd rank him. I think he's probably going to be in between that 26 and 10 range. So that could all change too, because he's going to have a full year to get accustomed to the Ravens scheme as opposed to joining on the fly from Chicago. So it's hard to evaluate him for a number of reasons. At any rate, though, he is great. And then Patrick Queen is also really solid according to PFF grades. He ranked 31st out of 81 linebackers. So they have a really good duo. And again, like a lot of these other positions, they have good depth as well, which is extremely nice to see. They won't be hampered by injuries nearly as much as other teams would be. Trenton Simpson is a super freak athlete, one of the most athletic linebackers in the NFL from day one, and he's going to be their linebacker 3, so he's really solid there. And then Malik Harrison is a solid number 4 linebacker as well. So they have depth on top of depth at linebacker, which is just, again, really nice to see. You could handle 2 injuries at linebacker, which you obviously, again, don't want to see, but you could handle it because you have young talent at an important position that I think a lot of people are underrating at this point. it's still super valuable to be able to shut down the shallow part of the field, and a good linebacker is going to do more than just cover the shallow part. They're going to be able to match deep downfield as well, and the Ravens have that covered with their starters and their depth guys as well. Lastly, for coaching, they have one of the best head coaches in the NFL with John Harbaugh. He is one of the smartest coaches in the league. If you ever hear him explain a situation in which he goes for it on fourth down and doesn't get it, he's not pouty about it. He just explains the rationale behind it, and he does so at an extremely high level. He'll also explain going for two on situations that maybe other coaches wouldn't necessarily go for. He's really, really smart. And it's apparent if you just give him any sort of listen. He understands going for it on fourth down, as I alluded to. He gets the most out of his players as well. There have been several years where the talent on this Ravens team has not been nearly up to par, and yet they still are super competitive, as evident by them competing in every game without Lamar Jackson, pretty much. And he is just a really good coach. He's great with in-game decisions, and he gets the most out of his guys. I don't know what more you could possibly want out of a coach. He's definitely top 5. And in addition, they have a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken, who has had some electric offenses in the NFL and in college as well. So I think he's a really good hire. I also think he's a really good hire because he gets rid of Greg Roman, who is, let's just say, limited in his offensive play designs. At a minimum, now the Ravens are going to be running an NFL-level offense, which they weren't under Roman because it was pretty much just a variation of the 5 different runs he knew and like 2 play actions he knew based off of the same runs. So the Ravens offense was overly simplistic before. I think it's going to be a lot better this year, and I think it might be something that takes a little bit of time for there to be a learning of, just because it is so much more advanced and nuanced than what Roman was doing. But I think the end result is going to be a lot better because teams won't be able to sit on the same 5 plays that they were able to with Roman before. In all, I think the Ravens are securely a Super Bowl contender, and really the only thing that prevents me from putting them in as a Super Bowl favorite is the fact that Lamar is still going to have to do a lot of the carrying on his own. The playmakers are much, much improved from where they were last year and in years past, but they're still not great in that regard. I would say I like them. I don't love them. And I think that could be a real issue for them, especially against the high potent offenses of the Chiefs or the Bengals. I think there are going to be times where they just can't keep pace offensively, but the Ravens do have a legit defense that should be able to slow down the offenses from really getting scoring in the first place. So it's just really going to be an issue in some specific games. But at the end of the day, the NFL, you can't really have any weaknesses in this era. You can't not be able to keep pace with the high-scoring offenses, because the high-scoring offenses are going to be the teams you're going to be playing in the playoffs. And I didn't even mention the Bills. They're another team that can really put up points. I'm not sure if the Ravens are going to be able to match them at their best, but Lamar is such a special talent, it's hard to really rule out that. And again, this Ravens defense is good enough that they should be able to slow down the offenses enough for most teams.